For decades, Michael Anthony kept his mouth shut. He watched other people tell his story for him. He watched his name get erased from album credits. And he watched his old bandmate go on television and call him talentless. He never fired back. He never wrote a tell-all. He just kept playing bass, kept smiling for the cameras, and kept his real feelings locked away. But now, at 70 years old, something has changed. The silence is finally breaking, and what Michael Anthony is choosing to say now, in the twilight of his life, is landing harder than anything he could have said 20 years ago. Because this isn't an angry young man defending his ego. This is an old man finally telling the truth about the people he loved, the band he built, and the betrayal that almost nobody saw coming until it was already done. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why so many people are calling this the most honest thing anyone from Van Halen has ever said out loud. Before we get to what he's exposing now, you need to understand who this man actually is, because most casual fans only know him as the bass guy standing quietly off to the side while Eddie Van Halen lit the stage on fire. That image does not do him justice. Michael Anthony grew up in a house full of music. His father, Walter, played trumpet, and young Michael spent his childhood listening to real instruments being played in his own living room, not just on the radio. Some of his earliest memories are of falling asleep to the sound of his father practicing in another room, that low warm tone drifting through the house like it belonged there. He picked up the trumpet himself as a kid, and he took it seriously, joining band programs and marching bands after his family moved to Southern California in the 60s. He was disciplined about it too, showing up early to rehearsals, learning to read music properly, understanding what it meant to play as part of something bigger than himself, a lesson that would matter more than he ever realized once he joined a band that constantly threatened to fall apart from ego alone. But something shifted in him around age 13. While all his friends were grabbing guitars or sitting behind drum kits, Michael wanted to be different. He turned to bass, an instrument that rarely gets the spotlight but holds the entire band together. Almost like the foundation of a house that nobody notices until it's gone. He didn't even own one at first. A friend named Mike Hershey loaned him a guitar, and Michael literally ripped 2 strings off it just to make it playable as a bass. That is how badly he wanted this. Not a shiny opportunity handed to him, but something he had to build with his own hands out of whatever was available. His father noticed the hunger in him and bought him a real Fender precision bass and an amplifier. A gift that changed the entire direction of his life. Michael studied the greats, players like Jack Bruce from Cream and John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, listening to their records over and over until he understood not just the notes, but the feeling behind them. And here's something most people don't know. He was naturally left-handed, but he taught himself to play right-handed anyway, just to keep up with the instruments available to him. Think about that for a second. Imagine being told your whole life that your natural hand isn't the correct one for this. And instead of giving up, you rewire your entire technique to make it work. That kind of quiet determination would define his entire career, even when nobody was giving him credit for it. By the early 70s, Michael was playing in local bands around the Los Angeles area, eventually landing in a group called Snake, where he wasn't just playing bass, but singing lead vocals too. Snake played the same local circuit as another young band, one led by 2 brothers named Alex and Eddie Van Halen, who called their group Mammoth. One night, Snake was opening for Mammoth at a high school show when Mammoth sound equipment broke down completely. Instead of packing up and leaving, Michael offered to let them use his own gear so the show could go on. It seems like a small, generous moment, but it planted a seed. Not long after, Mammoth's bass player, a young man named Mark Stone, left the band, and the Van Halen brothers remembered exactly who had bailed them out that night. They invited Michael to a jam session in a garage, and what happened in that garage would eventually reshape rock music forever. The chemistry was instant. His powerful, high-harmony vocals, combined with a tight, driving bass style, gave the brothers something they didn't even know they were missing. They brought him in immediately. Soon after, the band changed its name from Mammoth to Van Halen, and with David Lee Roth stepping in on vocals, the classic lineup was complete. For Michael, this wasn't just a new gig. This was the beginning of a life that would take him from garages in Pasadena to arenas packed with tens of thousands of screaming fans across the entire planet. As Van Halen's popularity exploded through the late 70s and into the 80s, Michael became one of the most reliable professional members of the group, at a time when reliability inside that band was rare. While Eddie was busy reinventing what a guitar could even do, and David Lee Roth was busy being the flashiest frontman in rock, Michael was the guy quietly locking down the rhythm and delivering those unmistakable high vocal harmonies that made songs like Jamie's Cryin' and Feel Your Love Tonight so unforgettable. Ask any real Van Halen fan, and they'll tell you that voice is baked into the band's DNA. Without it, half of those songs simply don't sound the same. He didn't chase headlines, he didn't need magazine covers. And while the other three members cycled through public feuds and dramatic outbursts, Michael quietly became the glue holding the whole operation together behind the scenes, the guy everyone could count on to show up prepared and leave his ego at the door. For years, things seemed fair. Michael was treated as an equal partner, sharing in 20% of the band's profits, expenses, and even its debts, just like everyone else. He had a real seat at the table. But as the band's fame grew bigger and bigger, so did the power struggles behind the scenes, and slowly, the financial arrangements began shifting in favor of the Van Halen brothers and Roth. Michael's share started shrinking piece by piece, and here is where the story turns from disappointing into something much darker. By 1984, Van Halen had reached the absolute peak of their fame. The album simply titled 1984 gave the world Jump, Panama, and Hot for Teacher, turning the band into a global phenomenon. But according to the band's own former manager, Noel Monk, something happened behind the scenes during that tour that would follow Michael for the rest of his life. Picture this. It's hours before a concert. Michael is backstage, likely thinking about nothing but the show ahead of him, when he's suddenly presented with a legal document. Standing over him while he reads it are the three other members of his own band, the people he trusted, the people he had built this entire dream with since a garage in Pasadena. There's no lawyer in the room for him, no time to step outside and call someone he trusts, just three familiar faces standing close, waiting for a signature, while a stadium full of fans outside has no idea any of this is happening. The pressure in that room must have been suffocating. He signs away his future songwriting credits and royalties, not just going forward, but retroactively, meaning he lost his stake in the very album that was making them all rich in that exact moment. Stop and think about what that actually means. Every time Jump played on the radio for the next 40 years, every time 1984 sold another copy, added up to more than 10 million copies just in the United States alone, Michael Anthony got nothing extra for it. Not because he wasn't part of creating it, but because three men cornered him with a contract minutes before he had to walk on stage and perform in front of thousands of people who had no idea what had just happened to him. He didn't have time to call a lawyer. He didn't have time to think it through calmly. He had a choice between signing or possibly blowing up the tour, the band, and the dream he'd sacrificed everything for. So he signed. For decades afterward, he stayed quiet about it, choosing not to publicly criticize the very people who did this to him, because deep down, all he ever wanted was to keep playing music with the band he loved. If that was the only wound, maybe he could have healed from it eventually. But it wasn't. As the years went on, Eddie Van Halen, the same man who once needed Michael's steady bass and vocals to complete the band's sound, began publicly diminishing him. In a 2015 interview with Billboard, Eddie claimed he had to show Michael how to play every single note, essentially accusing him of having no real musical initiative of his own. Fans and fellow musicians erupted, because anyone who had actually watched Michael perform for decades knew that claim didn't hold up. Michael later responded that he always learned the band's material on his own, and that no such teaching sessions had ever happened. If they had, wouldn't there be some kind of proof after all those years together? There wasn't. But here's what makes this cut so deep. This wasn't a stranger saying these things. This was Eddie, someone Michael had known and trusted for decades, someone he considered family. Michael later admitted the comments were emotionally draining, especially because he had spent years protecting the peace within the band, biting his tongue through countless tensions just to keep everyone together. Imagine giving your entire adult life to someone's vision, helping build something that changes music history, and then watching that same person go on national television and quietly erase your value in front of millions of people. That's not just a professional insult. That's a betrayal of trust between two people who once considered each other brothers. And unlike Eddie, who had cameras and interviews and a platform ready whenever he wanted to speak his mind, Michael had almost none of that. He had to sit at home, watching his own reputation get rewritten by someone else, with no equal opportunity to correct the record in real time. By the mid-2000s, communication between Michael and Eddie had almost completely broken down. And this is where the story takes its most brutal turn. During the recording of 1998's Van Halen 3 album, Michael played bass on only 3 of 11 tracks, with Eddie handling the rest himself. Then, on the band's 2004 compilation album, Michael's only real contribution to the new songs was backing vocals. Piece by piece, without any dramatic announcement, without any final conversation, Michael was being quietly written out of the band he helped create from nothing. Even the reunion tour with Sammy Hagar that same year came with its own quiet sting. Before Michael was allowed to rejoin for that tour, he reportedly had to accept a reduced financial arrangement, one that treated him more like a hired hand brought in for the job rather than a founding member of the band he'd helped build from a garage in Pasadena. He agreed anyway, because performing the music still mattered more to him than the terms attached to it. Then came the final blow, and it's almost impossible to hear this part without feeling something. In 2006, Eddie decided to replace Michael with his own teenage son, Wolfgang Van Halen. Now think carefully about how Michael found out about this. Not through a phone call, not through a face-to-face conversation after everything they had built together. He found out through rumors and speculation online, the same way any random fan on the internet would have learned it. Imagine scrolling through a screen and discovering, in the same casual way strangers did, that the band you gave your entire youth to no longer wanted you, and that nobody involved thought you deserved to hear it directly first. After decades of loyalty, after sacrificing songwriting credits, after biting his tongue through years of public insults, Michael Anthony wasn't even given the basic decency of being told directly that his time in the band was over. He later admitted he felt completely blindsided and hurt. Not by the decision itself necessarily, because bands change, people move on. That's just how the industry works sometimes. What hurt him was the silence, the erasure, being tossed aside like his decades of contribution meant nothing at all. After leaving Van Halen, Michael didn't disappear or fade into bitterness. He went right back to what he loved most, reconnecting with former Van Halen frontman Sammy Hagar and forming new projects together, including a touring act cheekily named The Other Half, a nod to the two of them being the overlooked halves of Van Halen's legacy. Along the way, he even joined a short-lived supergroup called Planet Us alongside guitarist Joe Satriani and drummer Dean Castronovo, a project that never released a full album, but proved Michael could still hold his own among some of the most respected musicians in rock. In 2008, he co-founded Chickenfoot alongside Hagar, Satriani, and Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith, and that band actually debuted in the top 10 of the Billboard 200. Later in 2014, he joined Sammy Hagar and The Circle, alongside guitarist Vic Johnson and drummer Jason Bonham, son of the legendary John Bonham, a band that kept the classic Van Halen sound alive on stage while also releasing new music, including an album that hit number 4 on the Billboard charts in 2019. Through everything, Michael proved something important. His talent, his voice, and his musicianship were never the problem. He never needed anyone to teach him every note. He simply needed a stage that respected him. After Eddie Van Halen passed away in 2020, there was renewed hope among fans that Michael might finally get some kind of closure, maybe through a tribute tour honoring Eddie's legacy. Talks did begin in 2021 and 2022, with Alex Van Halen reportedly reaching out to former members, including Michael and David Lee Roth. For a moment, it looked like the surviving members might come together one final time. But old wounds don't heal that easily. Reports suggest David Lee Roth resisted certain parts of the tribute format, unwilling to participate in something that so directly honored Eddie's memory in the way the rest of the group wanted. Then Alex Van Halen suffered a back injury in 2022, making a physically demanding tour far less realistic. Michael later confirmed he had been contacted and was genuinely interested in being part of it, but the emotional and logistical barriers were simply too enormous to overcome. The reunion collapsed, and Michael was denied any real chance at final closure with the band he had given his entire youth to building. Even Eddie's own family has shown how carefully they're guarding his story. Valerie Bertinelli, Eddie's ex-wife, has openly said she wants no biopic about him or the band made while she's still alive, telling their son Wolfgang to essentially wait until she's gone before allowing anything like that to happen. She's spoken about protecting Eddie's memory from being dramatized or sensationalized, especially around his struggles with addiction, saying she doesn't want strangers deciding how the most painful chapters of his life get performed for entertainment. And Wolfgang himself, now an artist in his own right with his band Mammoth WVH, has said there are currently no plans for a new Van Halen album or tour, stating plainly that the band simply cannot exist without his father. It's clear the entire family is choosing quiet dignity over public spectacle, protecting a legacy that so many other people tried to fight over for decades. So here we are, watching Michael Anthony at 70 years old, finally speaking his truth without holding back the way he used to, not out of anger or bitterness, but because he's earned the right to finally tell his own story instead of letting other people tell it for him. He sacrificed his royalties. He endured public humiliation from someone he loved like family. He was replaced without so much as a courtesy phone call. And through every single bit of it, he never stopped loving the music or the band that broke his heart. Maybe that's the most powerful part of this entire story. Michael Anthony didn't survive Van Halen by becoming bitter. He survived by staying exactly who he always was, a steady, talented, loyal musician who never needed the spotlight to prove his worth. Now, decades later, the world is finally starting to listen to him instead of about him. If this story moved you the way it moved me while researching it, do me a favor and hit that like button. And let me know in the comments what you think Eddie owed Michael that he never got. Subscribe for more untold stories from rock history, because there are so many more of these buried underneath the surface. And if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, click the next video on your screen right now.